As the days passed, whispers replaced wails in the halls of justice. No one dared talk loud, but the news traveled fast. When the bailiff returned from that toilet cubicle, his face was white as a sheet. No one had to tell him twice to get back to that second-floor bathroom. Soon, what felt like half the city's cops were swarming all over that bathroom. Forensics teams taking dust off everything and zooming in on the camera phone pictures. The judge made a gag order announcement that was so short and sharp, it sounded more like a threat than a rule. The media ate it up, though. The case was the biggest story since that dog was found driving a car. Every reporter in the country wanted to be first to the punchline. But the truth was, no one knew where this was going. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You know it's going to happen, but you can't look away. As for Charles Redford, he was acting like a kid who'd just lost his favorite toy. Posh Boy was shedding crocodile tears, his voice cracking as he told the cameras about how much he cared for Elijah and how horrified he was by his death. All anyone could think was, why are we not arresting him yet? They hadn't found anything to stick charges to, and there were rules about jumping to conclusions. But everyone in that courtroom knew what Grace had opened up. Pandora's box of corruption. No one was safe anymore. Each of those walls had 100 secrets hiding behind them, and Grace had just busted the door down. The press was hungry for answers, and the only thing feeding them was silence. Even the police seemed hesitant to touch this case, like they were waiting for someone else to make the first move. The judge broke the silence one evening when he announced a delay in the proceedings. "We need time to, assess new evidence," he stammered, trying to sound firm but failing miserably. Everyone in the public gallery knew exactly what he was doing. The judge was afraid of upsetting the balance that had held for so long, afraid of where this would lead. He should have retired years ago, but that's the thing about power, isn't it? Once you're in, you never want to let go. He hoped this mess would just fade away, but Grace had planted a seed, and seeds grow into trees, whether you like it or not. No one in that room slept well anymore. They were all prisoners in their own fears. Grace was waiting for justice, but the kind of justice that never comes easy. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths, and Grace was about to show them all how. She stayed in her tiny flat, curtains drawn, pretending she wasn't at the center of a maelstrom. The media had picked apart every word she'd ever uttered, and now she was a celebrity nobody wanted to meet. Flowers turned up at her door. She threw them out. Get-well-soon cards sat unopened on her table, mocking her with their cheery words. She wasn't getting better. She was getting ready. One afternoon, a package arrived. Nothing special, just a brown envelope pushed under her door. Inside was a pile of papers, and when she saw the wax seal at the top, she knew whose it was. With shaking hands, she broke the seal. The letter read, "My dear Grace, I trust this finds you well, despite the ordeal you've been subjected to. Know that whatever they offer, you must refuse. Stick to the facts. They will try to twist your words, break your spirit, but they can't touch you if you don't budge. Think of your daughters, Grace. Think of all the girls who can't speak up like you did. This is bigger than you now. This is a fight worth having. Yours in purpose, Alice Fielding." There was no signature, just a name she recognized. Alice Fielding was one of the prosecutors, someone decent in a rotten system. She was saying, "Don't back down, Grace. Don't back down because you're not alone." And that gave her hope. Hope that someone had her back, that someone understood the sacrifice she was making. She folded the letter carefully, tucked it under her pillow, and slept with it like a talisman. Whenever doubt crept in, she'd feel the paper beneath her cheek and remember she had allies. The next hearing was a blur. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the judge banged his gavel until his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. But Grace didn't buckle. She was a rock. The defense team tried their tricks, throwing in random witnesses, calling in experts to challenge her claims, even accusing her of making up the whole story for attention. But Grace didn't flinch. She stood up to them, holding her ground, telling them, "I know what I saw. I know what I touched. I know what I smelled." In the end, they couldn't prove she was lying. They couldn't take away what she'd said. She'd done her part. Now it was up to the others, the ones with the power to make change. The judge was visibly shaken. He was losing control of the narrative, and that scared him. But in losing control, he was also losing his mask. The world saw him not as a fair arbiter, but as a man clinging to a corrupt past. He tried to salvage it, but it was too late. The die was cast. The jury delivered a swift verdict: guilty. Silence erupted in the courtroom. Could hear a pin drop, feel the tension thicken in the air. Charles Redford crumpled in his seat. The family name that had always protected him had just taken its last breath. The judge slammed his gavel, the sound echoing like a funeral bell. It is with great disappointment that I find the accused. He paused, making eye contact with every member of the Redford clan. Guilty of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter? I acknowledge the mitigating circumstances, but the sentence remains unchanged. 5 years in prison? Charles's face drained of color. He didn't need to hear the rest. 5 years was just a start. A new scandal appeared daily, stripping layers of varnish off the Redford name. Charity donations were frozen. Business partners severed ties. Company shares plummeted. It was a financial earthquake. The truth had a way of leveling things, didn't it? Meanwhile, Grace received flowers again, and these ones were simple carnations, but they brightened her whole life. She knew what they stood for: gratitude, admiration, pride. She wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. She was a symbol of courage, of speaking up. Elijah's parents sent her a note thanking her for giving their son's death meaning. The principal from Elijah's school put a photo of her up on the staff room wall, a reminder to never ignore the small voices. In time, the media circus moved on to the next shiny thing, but for Grace, every day was a little brighter. She still cleaned floors, but now she saw different stains: the stain of injustice, the stain of fear, the stain of lies. And every time she saw them, she knew she had the power to say, "I won't clean that up." After all, it was Grace who'd cleaned up that courtroom, not by wiping down tables, but by wiping away the illusion of justice. In a world where justice was a luxury reserved for the privileged few, she'd shown that sometimes the quietest voice can be the loudest. She'd reminded everyone that the truth doesn't always set you free, but it always shines a light on the darkness. In the most extravagant mansions, there's often a room filled with cobwebs and dust, housing relics from a forgotten past. One such relic was an old album tucked away in a trunk, gathering dust for decades. It contained photos from a bygone era, faces with names and dates carefully written on the back. This album was more than just paper and photographs. It was a tangible link to a history deliberately erased. Daniel's great-grandfather had been enslaved on the original plantation. His great-grandmother had been a maid in the mansion, and his grandmother Ruth had cared for Harrison's mother when she was dying of cancer. But the most revealing detail was in the medical records Ruth had kept secret for decades. Harrison's mother had cured herself of terminal cancer using traditional treatments that Ruth had administered. But the family doctors never knew the truth, crediting the miraculous recovery to the conventional treatments that were failing. Now, years later, this album was more important than Daniel imagined. On the worn pages, he saw not just family members, he saw strength, resilience, and tradition. Most importantly, he saw the key to curing Victoria Whitmore, the woman who had become his family's new enemy. That afternoon, Ruth called Daniel to her side. "We have to help her," Ruth said, her gaze fixed on a photograph of a smiling woman holding a baby Daniel. "Even though she has treated us badly for years, she is still our relative. And besides, Victoria isn't just physically ill. She's sick with guilt, fear, and shame. Her body is reflecting the prison she has built for her own soul." Daniel said the next morning, "Victoria isn't just physically ill. She's sick with guilt, fear, and shame. Her body is reflecting the prison she has built for her own soul." Ruth nodded proudly. "And now, my grandson, you understand what true healing she needs. It's not just about making her walk again. It's about making her face who she really is and what she's done." "Exactly. But remember, our family has never used our gifts to hurt. Always to heal, even when the person doesn't deserve it, even when she hates us." Daniel spent the rest of the week watching Victoria with new understanding. Every cruel gesture she made, every attempt to humiliate him, only confirmed his diagnosis. She wasn't paralyzed by physical damage, but by a guilt so deep it had manifested as actual paralysis. The plan that began to form in his mind was audacious and dangerous. It wasn't just about proving he could heal her, but forcing her to confront decades of privilege built on the suffering of others. Lies about her own identity and crimes she had buried under piles of money. Victoria Whitmore thought she was fighting a poor boy who wanted her leftovers. She had no idea she was about to face 4 generations of accumulated wisdom, a lineage of healers who had survived centuries of oppression, and a young man who carried not only the knowledge to cure her, but also the evidence to destroy her completely. On Sunday morning, Daniel rang the front doorbell for the first time, no longer using the back door reserved for people like him. When Victoria opened the door, she found not only Daniel, but also Ruth Thompson and a third person who made her blood run cold. Dr. Patricia Williams, the neurologist who had secretly treated Harrison's mother years earlier. "Good morning, Victoria," Daniel said calmly. "I've come to keep my promise. Today's the day you're going to walk again." "Go ahead," Daniel smiled. "They'll want to see this too, especially when they find out who you really are." Ruth stepped forward, carrying an old leather briefcase. Victoria Kowalski, daughter of Polish immigrants, born July 19, 1975. Married Harrison Whitmore in 2005, 3 months after discovering he was cheating on her. Victoria's face paled. No one had known her real name for decades. "The accident that left you paralyzed happened exactly 1 day after you discovered Harrison was planning to divorce you." Daniel continued. "Very convenient, don't you think?" Dr. Williams opened a medical file. "I treated Harrison's mother when she was dying of cancer. Ruth here was the one who actually cured her, but the family never knew. I kept all the records, including the neurological tests I performed on you after the accident." "Your tests always showed normal neural activity," Dr. Williams said coldly. "But you paid me very well to keep that a secret, didn't you? $5 million to confirm a non-existent paralysis?" Victoria staggered, leaning against the doorframe. "You can't prove anything." Daniel smiled and took a digital recorder out of his pocket. "I can. You know that monitoring system you installed to keep an eye on your employees? It worked very well for recording your phone conversations, too." Victoria's voice echoed from the device. "Dr. Williams, I need you to stick with the diagnosis. If Harrison finds out, I can walk. I'll lose everything in the divorce." Daniel connected his phone to a portable speaker. The videos began to play. Victoria getting up from her wheelchair to reach something high on a bookshelf, walking normally through the garden in the early hours of the morning, even running on the treadmill in her private gym in the basement. "Stop!" Victoria yelled, but her own voice on the videos betrayed her, talking normally to staff when she thought there were no witnesses. "There's more," Daniel said softly. "Harrison's medical records. He altered his will while he was sedated after his heart attack. It's the same Dr. Williams who confirmed your fake paralysis also falsified your husband's death certificates." Dr. Williams hung his head. "She blackmailed me. She said she would reveal that I had covered up the fake paralysis. If I didn't confirm that Harrison died of natural causes..." "Harrison was poisoned," Ruth said with the authority of someone who had seen similar symptoms for decades in a hospital. "Digitalis extracted from the foxglove plant. It kills slowly, simulates a heart attack, and is almost impossible to detect after a few days." Victoria collapsed in her wheelchair, realizing that her world of lies was completely crumbling. "You don't understand? He was going to leave me with nothing. I gave the best years of my life to that man. And now, Daniel." There, and I realized, I'm her. I've always been her, mopping the floors while people step over the truth. And if I didn't speak now, no one ever would. She opened her eyes, and for a moment there was no courtroom, no judge, no fancy suits or stenographers or jury. There was just the truth, standing alone. And for once, everybody listened. The whole place felt like a tomb now, sealed, breathless, heavy with the weight of too many lies finally collapsing. Grace stood in the middle of it all, solid as a rock. The judge, who'd seemed so powerful and thunderous before, now looked like a crumbling old statue, shaken by testimony he could no longer ignore. Then came the creak of the courtroom doors. Everyone turned. Elijah's grandmother walked in, bent with age, wearing a faded coat and carrying nothing but a folded photo of her grandson. She didn't need to say anything. As she walked down the aisle, people in the gallery slowly stood up, one by one, until the entire courtroom was on its feet. Not because anyone told them to, but because it felt right. Grace turned and saw her. Their eyes met, and in that one look, a lifetime of grief and courage passed between them like an unspoken promise. The old woman walked up to Grace and gently placed Elijah's photo in her hands. Grace held it like it was made of glass. A fragile piece of truth finally returned home. That's when the judge spoke, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. This court will recess immediately. The jacket will be sent for forensic testing. And Ms. Grace, you are hereby placed under the full protection of this court as a key witness. The bailiff stepped forward to escort her out safely, but Grace didn't move. She looked straight at the judge and said one final thing. Not for drama, not for revenge, but because it was simply the truth. You tried to silence me because I cleaned your floors. But justice doesn't care what uniform I wear. It cares what I saw, and I saw everything. The judge didn't argue, didn't even blink, just nodded, completely defeated. Grace walked out slowly, Elijah's photo pressed against her chest.
Oh.
The entire courtroom still standing as if they were watching history walk past them. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps like hungry vultures. Questions flew like bullets, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, but Grace didn't speak to any of them. She just looked up at the sky and whispered to herself, "You can rest now, Elijah. They finally heard you." And in that moment, under those blinding lights, the woman they'd called just a cleaner became something incredible. She became the voice of the forgotten, the defender of truth, the witness nobody saw coming. No matter how many fancy names or important titles filled that courtroom, hers was the one they'd never ever forget. That's the power of truth in it. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a 1,000-pound suit or a faded cleaning uniform. Someone finally decides to speak up, to stand up for what's right. The whole world has to stop and listen. Grace didn't just change one trial that day, she reminded everyone watching that justice is unbound money or power or connections. It's about having the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. So next time you see someone being dismissed or ignored because of what they do for a living or where they come from, remember Grace? Remember that the most powerful voice in that courtroom wasn't the judge with his gavel or the lawyers with their degrees. It was the cleaner with calloused hands and an unbreakable spirit who refused to let the truth stay buried.